might be trapped without chains, and not even realize it. Not the kind of trap you can see, hear, or touch, but one woven into the very fibers of your mind. It doesn't rattle when you move. It doesn't scrape when you strain against it. It simply sits there, quietly convincing you there's no point in trying. And the worst part? You believe it. Maybe it started with something small, a goal that slipped through your fingers no matter how hard you reached. An exam you studied for, only to fail. A promotion you worked toward, only to be passed over. A relationship you poured yourself into, only to watch it collapse. You told yourself you'd try again. You told yourself next time would be different. But the failures stacked, each one chipping away at the invisible scaffolding that holds up the will to act. Until one day you didn't even notice you'd stopped trying. That's the essence of learned helplessness, a quiet epidemic that spreads not through contact, but through experience. It doesn't chain your hands, it convinces you your hands are useless. In the late 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman was trying to understand something else entirely. Why some behaviors persisted, even when the circumstances changed. But what he stumbled upon became one of the most unsettling revelations in the history of psychology. Picture this: a dog placed in a harness, unable to move. In front of it, a small grid on the floor. At random intervals, an electric shock would pulse through the grid. The dog couldn't stop it, couldn't avoid it. The shocks came no matter what it did. At first, the animal would thrash, bark, struggle. But soon, it stopped. Its body went still, eyes dull, breathing shallow. It had learned the most dangerous lesson. Nothing you do matters. Later, Seligman placed that same dog in a different box, one it could easily escape. The floor on one side delivered shocks, but just a small hop over a low barrier would bring it to safety. Any other dog, unconditioned by the earlier experience, would jump instantly. But the dog that had learned helplessness? It stayed. The barrier might as well have been a wall of fire. That's when the horror of it became clear. The prison was no longer physical. It lived in the mind. And if a dog could learn this kind of despair, so could we. We don't get electric shocks in tidy psychology labs. Ours come in subtler forms. The rejection letter that feels like a verdict on your worth, the chronic illness that wears down your will, the years of being told by others, or by yourself, that you're not capable. Each moment is a spark, a jolt. You think you're just weathering bad luck, but in reality, your mind is building a map where escape routes disappear. There's a reason this feels so absolute. In the language of cognitive psychology, learned helplessness isn't just about behavior. It rewires the way we interpret the world. Seligman called it the explanatory style, the mental habit of seeing setbacks as permanent, this will never change, pervasive, it ruins everything, and personal, it's my fault. Once those beliefs take root, they don't just describe your reality, they define it. Think about the moments in your own life when you stopped reaching for something you once wanted. Was it because the thing became impossible? Or because somewhere deep down you became convinced it was? There's a story from the Great Depression that captures this perfectly. In rural towns, traveling carnivals would set up with their usual attractions, rides, games, and the animal acts. One man kept an elephant tethered to the ground by nothing more than a thin rope tied to a wooden stake. The elephant could have snapped the rope with a flick of its leg, but it never tried. Why? Because as a baby, it had been chained to a much heavier stake it could not escape. Years of struggle taught it the lesson. The rope is stronger than you. By the time it grew into its massive strength, it didn't matter that the stake was weak. The fight had left it. You and I, we like to believe we're not that elephant. We imagine we'd pull the rope, break the chain, leap the barrier. But the truth is, the human mind is even more susceptible to these invisible tethers because we can reinforce them ourselves. Once you believe you're powerless, every failure becomes proof. Every inaction becomes protection. And so, the trap deepens. But here's where things turn unsettling. Learned helplessness doesn't just sap your will, it changes your body. Studies in neurobiology show that chronic helplessness alters brain chemistry, shrinking the hippocampus, the very region tied to memory and learning. It floods the system with cortisol, the stress hormone, keeping you in a constant state of quiet alarm. It's as if your mind and body join forces to make the cage permanent. And still, most people don't even know they're inside it. We walk through our days convinced we're free agents, making our own choices, when in reality, our past failures are whispering in the background. Don't try. It won't work. Stay where you are. You might call it playing it safe. You might call it being realistic. But what if it's something else? What if it's the silent epidemic shaping the borders of your life? The most dangerous thing about learned helplessness is that it doesn't feel like a prison. It feels like the truth. And if it isn't the truth, if your barrier is just a rope and a wooden stake, what happens when you finally decide to pull? You pull, and for a second nothing moves. The rope holds, your heart drops through the floor. See? The old belief whispers. Told you. But then there's the tiniest give. Barely a breath. A fraction. And in that sliver of movement lives a different story. Effort has consequences, not always fast, not always dramatic, but real. This is the hinge where helplessness either calcifies or cracks, because the mind demands certainty. Either I can or I can't. Reality offers ambiguity. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, and sometimes you need more tries than you thought were reasonable. Ambiguity is where belief is forged or forfeited. Here's the tension we rarely admit. There are things you genuinely cannot control. Sometimes the storm is bigger than the boat. Ellen Langer called it the illusion of control, our tendency to overestimate our influence, like feeling more confident rolling dice yourself than if someone else does it, even though physics doesn't care. And if you chase control where none exists, you'll drown in frustration and call it fate. But the opposite error, underestimating your influence, breeds something worse. You stop reaching for the tiller even when the wind shifts in your favor. So the question isn't, do you control everything? It's, do you control anything here, now, in a way that matters? Even a narrow answer, yes, a little, changes the whole game. Psychologist Albert Bandura named the engine that makes that shift possible. Self-efficacy, not vague confidence. Evidence-based belief in your ability to produce a specific outcome. It grows through mastery experiences, small wins that your brain can't argue with. You lifted the barrier once, you can lift it again, and then higher. Think of a kid in a classroom who's convinced she's bad at math. She lowers her eyes when the teacher asks for volunteers. She studies less because it feels pointless. She gets more wrong because she studied less. Proof in her mind that the label is true. But a different teacher breaks the spiral. One problem designed at just the right difficulty, solved with guided steps, followed by a second problem only slightly harder. Her brain logs the sequence: effort, strategy, result. 2 weeks later, the label starts to peel. Bandura showed that when people witness models like them succeed, their own self-efficacy rises. That's why a friend's story of climbing out of debt or getting sober hits you harder than a celebrity memoir. It's your nervous system whispering, that could be me. But there's a trap on the other side. If every failure is framed as a "you didn't try hard enough" story, helplessness mutates into shame. That's not agency. That's blame dressed in grit's clothing. Some circumstances are brutal. Some systems are rigged. We don't fix injustice by pretending it isn't there. So we hold both truths in our hands. The world constrains us. We still have levers. A quick thought experiment. Imagine 2 identical rooms with a single door. In room A, the door is locked. No key exists. In room B, the door is unlocked but heavy. Now picture a person who tries the door once, feels resistance, and stops forever. In room A, that makes sense. In room B, that choice becomes the prison. Learned helplessness teaches you to treat every door like room A. Self-efficacy teaches you to push a second time, and then learn to use your shoulder. Carol Dweck's research on mindsets sharpens the point. Praise a child for being smart, and setbacks threaten their identity. Praise them for the process. Strategy, effort, persistence, and setbacks become information, not indictment. The fixed mindset hears a no as a verdict. The growth mindset hears not yet. In life, we're constantly writing captions under our experiences. The caption you choose changes what your nervous system prepares for next, retreat or re-engage. But what about the times effort truly doesn't budge reality? There's a reason acceptance is a pillar of every resilient philosophy, from cognitive therapy to stoicism to 12-step programs. You release what you can't control, not to give up, but to stop wasting strength where it can't matter. Then you channel that strength where it can. There's a story from a quiet hospital floor that reveals just how much even tiny control matters. In the 1970s, researchers Ellen Langer and Judith Rodin ran an experiment in a nursing home. One group of residents was told the staff would take care of everything. They were safe, looked after, comfortable. Another group was told they had choices: which night to watch a movie, how to arrange their rooms, even the responsibility to care for a small plant. Months later, the choice group was more active, happier, and astonishingly, showed lower mortality. Control wasn't a metaphor, it was medicine. Your life is not a nursing home, but the principle scales. When you claim real choices, however small, you shift from being acted upon to being an actor. Your brain and body notice. Cortisol eases. Curiosity stirs. You start looking for the next lever. There's another layer hidden deeper in the brain's circuitry. Later work by Seligman and Stephen Meyer found that it isn't just shocks that teach animals to give up. It's the experience of uncontrollability itself, mediated by a stress pathway that projects from the dorsal raphe nucleus. When an animal learns it can turn off the stressor by pressing a panel, by moving to a safe side, that knowledge triggers prefrontal regions to quiet the helplessness circuit. The takeaway is startling. Control learned once can immunize you later. You don't need to master everything. You need a memory of mastery to call upon when the world tilts. Let's ground this in a different mini-story. You're sitting in your car at a red light late at night. No one is around. The light stays red. A minute, then 2. You wrestle with a sense of violation. This is unfair. This is stupid. But the rules are the rules. A friend in the passenger seat says, "Try backing up and pulling forward again. It might trigger the sensor." It's not guaranteed. It's a maybe. You roll back, inch forward. The light flips. That moment lodges in your mind. Sometimes the system isn't hostile. It's indifferent until you give it new input. The credible counterpoint still stands. Not every stuck light responds. Not every barrier gives. Some fights aren't noble. They're wasteful. We need the wisdom to sort them. But helplessness insists the sorting is already done, and not in your favor. Agency says the list is always under review. You might worry that testing the rope will only confirm your fear when it doesn't budge. Fair. That risk is real. The antidote is to redefine what counts as success. Not "I escaped today," but "I gathered data." Not "I changed everything," but "I changed one variable." Scientists run experiments without tying their identity to each result. You can too. One more story, quieter this time. A man in his 30s, after years of depressive episodes, begins keeping a controllables ledger. On the left side of a page, he writes the day's events. On the right, he writes only the elements he could influence: sleep, nutrition, one conversation he initiates, 10 minutes of movement, one email sent. He doesn't judge the left column. He just honors the right. 6 months in, his life is not a postcard transformation. He still has bad days. But the ledger tilts. The right-hand column swells. He can feel the rope loosening, thread by thread. This is the uncomfortable truth. Hope isn't a feeling you wait for. It's a skill you practice. Learned optimism, Seligman called it, not because the world is secretly easy, but because explanatory styles can be trained. You dispute catastrophic thoughts. You demand evidence. You hunt for the specific, the temporary, the external, where appropriate, not to dodge responsibility, but to keep your hands free. And sometimes, yes, you quit. You choose a different road, not from defeat, but from discernment. That, too, is agency. The pull that seemed to do nothing. It taught your nervous system that the story is not closed. The second pull teaches it again. Then you experiment with angle and timing. You enlist help. You try a tool. Every attempt is a vote for a different identity. The person who tests doors. The person who doesn't assume the worst. The person who knows when to push and when to pivot. The barrier hasn't fallen yet. Good. Tension means there's energy in the system. Stay with it, because the turning point is coming, not as a cinematic breakthrough, but as a quiet reintroduction to your own power, the kind that compounds. And when it arrives, it won't feel like fireworks. It will feel like a key turning inside a lock you forgot you carried. It will feel like a key turning inside a lock you forgot you carried. And then the oddest thing happens. You don't burst through a single grand door. You notice hallways, some dim, some narrow, many leading to other doors you never would have bothered with before. Once the mind admits some doors open, it starts scanning for handles instead of walls. This shift, this quiet rerouting of attention, isn't just philosophical. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, working on self-determination theory, proposed that our vitality grows from 3 nutrients: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Choice, skill, belonging. When you tug at the rope and it yields even slightly, you feed the first 2. You chose. It mattered. And if you have someone beside you, one voice that says, "Try again, I'm here," you feed the 3rd. The cage loosens faster when those 3 are present. It tightens when they're starved. But freedom brings a new anxiety. What if I'm not ready? What if I push too hard and break something? The body has its own wisdom about effort. The Yerkes-Dodson law, born from early 20th century experiments, maps arousal to performance in a curve. Too little, and you're flat. Too much, and you're flooded. The sweet spot is arousal enough to awaken but not drown you. You don't have to pulverize the barrier. You need just enough pressure to stay engaged, curious, slightly stretched. When you miss that window, the nervous system calls the whole thing proof again. So we work like climbers, testing holds, deliberate, breathing steady, adjusting grip, placing weight inch by inch. There's a woman I know who kept a box of keys in her kitchen drawer. They were old, mismatched. Apartment keys, office keys, a mailbox key from a city she'd left a decade ago. On days when the fog came in, when depression made every task look like wet concrete, she'd take one key out, choose one lock in her apartment, and try it, knowing it wouldn't fit. She did it to remember the sensation. Turn, no movement, turn, no movement, turn, click. It sounds absurd, even superstitious, but it taught her fingers something her thoughts forgot. Persistence is physical. Her ledger filled slowly. Her life followed. Here's the climactic insight that makes helplessness start to dissolve. Agency is not the claim that you can get what you want. It is the practiced capacity to change something on purpose, then learn from what happens next. Your power is not a guarantee. It is a relationship with reality, a conversation you keep having. The moment you accept that, the world stops being a set of verdicts and becomes a lab again. That's why Peter Gollwitz's research on implementation intentions is so potent. If X, then I will do Y. Not heroic declarations. Tiny contingencies that pre-decide the first move so you don't negotiate with dread at the threshold. If I wake and the fog is heavy, then I will drink water and stand in sunlight for 2 minutes. If I get a rejection email, then I will text one friend and move the task to next Tuesday's slot. These are not life hacks, they're pre-planted handles. Yet even handles can cut. Sometimes, despite skillful plans, reality bares its teeth. The illness flares. The appeal is denied. The job market shrugs. Do you return to the old doctrine, nothing works, or do you widen the frame? Behavioral activation, a therapy born from the radical idea that action can precede mood, offers a way through. You schedule values-based activities first, not because you feel like it, but because feeling often follows motion. You do the smallest meaningful thing available. You let meaning, not momentum, set the next step. And you forgive yourself for the days when the step is rest. The counterpoint still stands, and we honor it. Some constraints aren't rope, they're iron. Privilege and policy, history and luck, illness and accident, these do not vanish because you journal. There's nothing enlightened about pretending they're light, but there is something quietly revolutionary about moving where you can move inside them. Agency under constraint is not fake freedom. It's the only kind we ever get. If you want something even more concrete, try this. Choose one domain where you feel the most stuck. Write one sentence that names what you cannot control. Then write one sentence that names what you can. Keep both on the same card. That card is your compass. Most of what we call motivation problems are actually compass problems. We forget which direction contains any available path. The card points to it. Another story. One more door. A man spends months avoiding a conversation with his estranged brother, convinced it will explode. He tells himself he's protecting both of them. In truth, he's protecting the belief that nothing he does matters. One afternoon he writes a draft, deletes it, writes again, erases again. Implementation intention? If I hesitate, I will send the simpler version. He sends 5 lines. The reply isn't perfect. It isn't even satisfying. But it is human. It is not a wall. The next week, a second message. The third week, a call. They do not fix their history. They alter their future's trajectory by degrees the old story would have called impossible. Liking this tells the system, and your future self, that this exploration mattered. It's a quick vote for more work like this to reach the people still staring at red lights that never change. Then watch the next video in the series. It builds the muscle we started here. Practical handles, not slogans. One more nudge for your nervous system, one more mastery rep. Act while your mind is warm. Small actions become evidence, and evidence becomes belief. If this moved the rope even a millimeter, mark it, then keep going. Make the next attempt inevitable.